So I've said in the past that moral arguments for the supernatural or God or the existence of the soul are the ones that I find the most compelling because we all have very firsthand, profound moral experiences which shape our lives. And so any treatment of the subject is something that all of us can relate to. Think about how much we obsess about morality and how few other things can incite as strong a reaction in us as when someone invokes a moral judgment towards us or about us. Like, I remember a friend of mine once commenting on someone's parking job in a parking lot when they were clearly taking up 2 spaces, and the guy came over and punched him in the face and knocked him out. Now, obviously, a casual comment of disapproval over something as trivial as parking does not warrant physical violence, but it just goes to show how much we are affected by our moral awareness and the awareness and how that can be communicated to us by other people. And if you don't believe me, just try it out for yourself. The next time you're at the grocery store in the checkout line, glance over at the person's cart in front of you and try telling them that given their obvious physical shortcomings, maybe they should make better nutritional choices. Or maybe walk up to a mother in some public setting and tell her that she's not doing a very good job of managing her children. Or give a coworker some unsolicited advice about how you disapprove of their performance at work. Because if morality really just was a private and personal preference, then those kinds of judgments wouldn't weigh on us and inspire the likely inflammatory reactions you should expect if you consider those scenarios. Like if someone told you, I just don't really like rock music, I'm more of a jazz person. Even if you were a rock music fan, you'd recognize that as just the difference in personal preferences and probably wouldn't react the way you would if someone accused you of lying after telling them some story of the time you did the thing that you thought would impress the people that you tell about it. Moral judgments just don't bounce off of us like personal preferences do. They keep us awake at night. They fill us with anxiety sometimes. But in admitting that, one of the most frustrating attitudes I encounter whenever I discuss morality on my channel is people who will just lazily invoke Darwinian evolution as what fully accounts for the phenomenon of human ethics and morality. They'll say things like, people who are moral have an evolutionary advantage, and societies that work together also have a similar advantage, just on a larger scale. So as natural selection chooses those who will survive and reproduce, it will favor more moral members of a particular species. And I have to say, I find this really unconvincing, if not just a terrible explanation for morality. Because evolution tells us about biological traits that are adaptations suited for a particular environment. So we might see like a fish that is adapted for deep sea environments, like adaptations that help them to survive in the cold and the dark and high barometric, I think that's what it's called, pressure. And evolution can be used as an explanatory mechanism because it tells us about rules or laws that condition species in that way. As in, every fish in this environment of this species has these certain adaptations, which fits with our understanding of how evolution conditions beings to survive and reproduce. And this is a very scientific way to explain the things that we experience and observe. You observe it, you make rational conclusions about those observations, which amounts to something like a scientific law. And what do we mean by a law? Well, we mean what always happens when we make an observation under certain conditions. So, for example, the law of gravity tells us that bodies with mass affect the space around them so that other bodies of mass will be drawn towards a larger body. And why is this a law? Because it's what always happens when we make the observations. It's replicable. Okay, fine, but applied to morality, the argument would go something like this. Ethical norms are the products of evolutionary conditioning to help the human species survive, okay? Just like the fish in deep waters, we see it adapting to its environment by exhibiting the same traits, always when we observe it. It's consistent, intelligible, and available for other researchers to observe and to confirm. So for example, it could be claimed that it's to our advantage that we not lie to one another. Most people think that dishonesty is immoral, right? So honesty must be an evolutionary advantage. If we avoid lying, a community will be able to thrive much better than one characterized by dishonesty and corruption. Except, here's the problem. We do observe people lying, and we ourselves have done it more than a few times. I'd be willing to wager. My son William is probably the only person I know who's never told a lie. So where's the adaptation that correlates to the environmental conditioning? If we find a bird with a particular beak in an environment, we observe that all the birds of that species, unless it's suffered an injury or something, have that same beak, thus explaining the evolutionary conditioning and compatibility with scientific observation. But if morality is the result of evolutionary conditioning, we should see the same consistency and uniformity, and yet we absolutely don't see anything even approaching that. People violate societies and their own ethical norms all the time. Every single person in the world is familiar with what it's like to be conscious of shame from the judgments of others, yes, but also self-inflicted assessments. We've all fallen short of our own expectations for ourselves. So in observing human beings, you could say, why does everyone in a particular climate have like darker skin? Well, perhaps because of exposure to a hot sun, making it again an evolutionary advantage. That's the kind of trait you could explain by evolution because it accounts for the uniformity of the trait among people exposed to the same conditioning. And if you said, why is it that nobody in this particular region or this country ever tells a lie? You might be able to invoke evolution because it fits with an observation about what always occurs and is repeatable and a verifiable observation. But no such society exists. At all times and in all places, morality stands as a law that is habitually broken. Gravity is never broken, just as there are no fish in the bottom of the ocean that don't have the necessary traits to survive in that environment. Evolution only explains how natural causes determine certain effects, which inevitably always occur. Morality is a judgment about what should have occurred or should not have occurred. What's more, morality is almost always about how we should restrain our powers, or what you might call our advantages, over others out of a sense of justice and duty towards them. But evolution and natural selection are almost always merely treating the question of how one member of the species survives, often at the expense of the rivals of that member. No moral code that we observe in any civilization thinks of justice in this way. For example, it might be to our advantage if we lie to our neighbor, if it means we can gain some kind of advantage of resources over him, let's say. It might be to our advantage if we actually just murder him altogether so that we will have all the resources to ourselves and, let's say, our offspring. And we observe this kind of thing in the animal world, the animal kingdom, all the time. Survival of the fittest is not about justice, mercy, kindness, or cooperation. It's about surpassing your rivals in fertility. Justice tells us that we have to restrain such instincts, but not because it will benefit our ability to survive. In fact, justice often tells us that our survival is secondary and maybe even something to be sacrificed in the name of what is good for all. Just think about how many virile, healthy, and capable young men sacrificed their lives long before they could reproduce during the great wars of the 20th century. And our moral instincts tell us to admire them for that sacrifice. We commemorate them ceremonially, almost religiously as a society. But if our morality inspires those kinds of actions, clearly evolution and natural selection do a really poor job of accounting for why a person should make those kinds of sacrifices, since it competes with our survival and our reproduction. So if morality can't be easily explained by evolutionary mechanisms, well, then what does account for it? Morality, I would argue, is a rational judgment about what ought to occur and how rational agents like ourselves ought to observe those judgments in our moral choices. This ability to make such judgments indicates that something about our rational perception is not determined by physical laws of cause and effect, but is somehow untethered from those laws, which otherwise determine everything else that we know of. And the fact that we're able to make such free judgments, if not a proof, is at least a very strong indication that our minds are not merely physically determined and are not explained or accounted for by merely physical reality. Morality observes the physical world and the events that occur within it, and then it somehow compares it to some standard of morality that it perceives by our minds outside and apart from the events that actually occur, the ones that we're making judgments about. So then we judge those events against that standard, the standard that we didn't observe. The standard is spaceless and it's timeless, making the interactions that take place with our minds and that standard at least partially spaceless and timeless as well. Morality points us to something more than the facts and the events that occur. It points us to what could and what should occur, which is not observed by something like the tools of science. Science only observes what does occur. Morality makes judgments about what occurs and either approves of those events or disapproves of them. Evolution, by contrast, is a theory derived from certain kinds of observations. That theory tells us what has occurred and what is likely to occur, but it doesn't tell us anything about what ought to occur or what should have occurred, entirely distinct from what does occur. If on the naturalist, materialist, atheistic view, our world is nothing more than matter in motion and objects obeying physical laws, then there's absolutely no point in discussing what should occur, because that's irrelevant. All we know of is what actually does occur, unless there's more to reality than mere matter, energy, and physical laws. And perhaps this haunting sensation that is inescapable to our rational minds, in which we obsess over these moral judgments that we are certainly constantly making, tells us about dimensions of being that transcend the mere physical and sensory. Okay, so that's the end of the video on that particular topic, but can you stick with me for a moment because I want to give you an update on this project Fisher's Network that I've been talking about. If you've heard the pitch at the end of a lot of my recent videos, you'll be somewhat familiar with what Fisher's Network is, but if you're not familiar with it, it's an initiative to try to get Catholic business people, Catholic business leaders and professionals to start to collaborate and to work together at a local level. And so far, we've had a lot of people sign up, but the problem is they're signing up to join through our website and the app, but there aren't crews in their locations. Crews are what we're calling the groups of people that are networking together. And so they're just kind of stuck in limbo a little bit. So what we really need from people who think that this is a worthwhile project is to step up and consider the possibility of forming a crew as a crew captain. So a crew captain is somebody who leads these crews. It doesn't require any particular unique expertise to lead networking organizations or groups like this. We provide resources, both technical resources and formation resources to help you as a crew captain and to help you get your group up and running. So there's a lot of people who are signing up again because they recognize this need. But we need to do more. We need to get crew captains together to help make this a possibility. So if you're interested in that, please check it out, fishersnetwork.com, for all the information that you'll need, and then you can sign up there as well.